Hi, this is Mary Owens with On Point. We have all seen the issues of populism sweeping across the United States and Europe. Populism defined as the common man demanding that their government recognize their common plight and their inability to control their lives. In June of 2016, the United Kingdom as a whole voted to leave the European Union. So we decided to explore this issue in more depth. We asked Her Majesty's Consul General Andrew Whitaker to please join us and share his views on what's next for Brexit. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us today. We so appreciate your time. We realize your schedule is very hectic at the moment.
Well, thank you. Pleasure to be here, Mary, and great to have a chance to chat.
Thank you. Could we start out today by having you explain what the vote was all about, a general picture to start out, so everyone is on the same page to understand about the meaning of Brexit?
Sure. So this was a referendum we held, as you said, last June 2016, which asked a simple in or out question. Should the UK remain a member of the European Union, or should the UK leave the European Union? It was a very big democratic event. We had over 70% of the population voted. That's over 30 million people. And the result was 52% supported leaving the European Union and 48% felt we should remain.
What were the key issues that led to the vote to leave?
So when you're talking about a democratic exercise of that size, as I said, over 17 million people voting to leave, trying to identify what all the individual issues were would be far too complicated. But we've picked out two that the government has set as particular priorities now as we leave. And those two are, one, taking control over immigration, and secondly, ending the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice, the ECJ, within the United Kingdom.
Now, are they still today the key issues in regards to negotiations, or do you anticipate them to be that?
So the UK government has set 12 objectives that we would like to see delivered as part of the negotiations that we will shortly be entering into. They range from issues around making sure that we're very clear in how the process will happen. We make sure it's an orderly transition as we leave the European Union. It looks at issues around maintaining the strength of the Union, the four different parts that make up the United Kingdom. It looks at maintaining the common travel area with Ireland, but also what we'd like to see is a very bold and ambitious free trade agreement with the European Union once we've left. So there are 12 objectives in total, and if it would help, we can run through what each of those are. Well,
that's interesting that you bring that up, because there seemed to be a lot of naysayers right after the vote that it was going to really hurt the UK economically. And I've noticed, following your economics, that actually right now the United Kingdom had GDP last year of 1.8%. It was only second to Germany at 1.9% of the industrialized nations of the G7. So far, even though there were some naysayers, it doesn't seem to be having a negative impact. Your unemployment is down, your inflation has gone up slightly, which is helpful. So do you anticipate that in light of all of this and the strength that your economy is maintaining, will that assist you in your negotiations?
I think you rightly highlight a number of key areas. We're very confident that the UK enters these negotiations from a position of strength. Exactly as you say, we've seen unemployment falling, we've seen a number of measures to reduce the government deficit. But the UK also has a number of other very positive factors that will remain key strengths of the UK. So things like the rule of law, the strength of our regulators, our fantastic science and research, our wonderful academic institutions, the English language, the global pool of talent that we have in the UK and will continue to attract. That means the UK enters these negotiations very confidently about what a future UK will look like outside of the European Union.
Let's talk for a moment the financial centers, particularly in London. Right now, London is almost the center of the EU for financial transactions of size and substance. And many times those who are going to be in the EU use a London-based banking system to be able to go anywhere within the EU without issue. Do you anticipate that London will be able to maintain that strength as related to financial services as the EU in general?
In short, yes. I mean, the many things that make the UK a fabulous financial centre will remain, whether that's the independence of our Bank of England and the strength of the regulators that we have there, the sheer diversity and range of talent that you'll find across the whole of the UK, but particularly in London. Clearly, there are going to be elements as it relates to specific bits of the EU arrangements that will be the subject of negotiation. But again, we enter those from a position of confidence that we want an arrangement that works for the UK and that works for our European partners.
Now, in your trade negotiations in the future, are you anticipating that trade deals could be written under the new agreement in both the sterling pound and the EU? And that those issues really won't be an impediment to negotiating future trade deals? You'll be able to accept both currencies within your system.
So just to be clear in terms of the situation today, we have sterling is the UK's currency, but within London we trade across every currency you can possibly imagine in the world. Yes,
a very important issue of your strength and being able to do so.
Absolutely. And so the short answer is yes. In the future, I would absolutely anticipate that will continue, and global organisations and the rest of the EU would expect that to continue.
Now, right after the vote in June of 2016, your currency took a hit quite hard, and now it seems to have stabilized. And many were criticizing that this would be a dramatic hit that would be permanent. But on the flip side of this, since the pound has dropped to some degree, it's really helping your trade currently. Your ability to export is improving. So could you talk a little bit about that? Are you going to have anything that you anticipate in the future that will have some agreement of evaluation of the sterling against the EU, or are you going to allow them to free float?
So the UK is very clear. We don't set, as a government, exchange rate targets. Our independent Bank of England has an inflation target that they try to hit through adjusting the interest rate in the UK, but we don't take any steps to target an exchange rate. We expect that to be set by the markets, and we expect the exchange rates to change over time depending on market conditions. As you say, we're very confident across the broad range of UK strengths that the UK will remain a very attractive place for foreign direct investment. As you say, we've seen some very strong successes since the vote. Very big companies like Google and Apple and Microsoft have announced very significant investments in the UK, and we expect that to continue. As you say, on one level, an exchange rate movement makes some exporting easier. Of course, it raises the price of imports, which can have knock-on impacts and affect the inflation rate as well.
Yes.
So there are many different factors that go in, as you well know.
Economics, that they're complicated.
Absolutely. But just to be clear, we don't have an exchange rate target that we're trying to hit.
Okay. I've also noted that there was a lot of naysayers that were indicating that the London real estate in particular was going to plummet. And at first, right after there was a temporary period that it did, but I also noted this year that by year end, the London real estate was up almost 7.5%, far in excess of inflation. So you seem to be, just from the natural economics being left alone as they are, showing your strength to the world because your own economy is ignoring the threat and saying things are going to be just fine. Do you anticipate that to continue during the next 2 years in the negotiation process once Article 50 is invoked?
As I said before, we are confident that we enter these negotiations from a position of strength. The government has taken many steps to reduce the deficit. We've announced plans to make the UK, or continue to make the UK, a very attractive place to invest, so reducing levels of corporation tax. So we now have the lowest levels of the G7 member states, and have confirmed that we will continue to reduce them further over the next couple of years as well. As you say, the fundamentals in the UK are there. Something like the housing market are subject to many different pressures, and in the UK, pressures on housing is one of the things that keeps prices high. We continue to see investment globally into that market, and I would absolutely expect that to continue.
Now, Article 50, once it is invoked, you have 2 years, as I understand, to negotiate everything that you need to negotiate. And if that needs to be extended, it's going to take the approval of everyone involved. Do you think it's realistic to get this all done within the 2 years, or do you think it's likely that there is going to need to be an extension to get all your trade deals, health agreements, immigration, and the like all completed?
So there are a number of different parts to that, and I'll try and sort of separate them out. As you say, we will, by the end of March this year, by the end of March 2017, trigger the Article 50 process. That allows for a 2-year process of negotiation. We enter that very optimistically and confident that we will successfully achieve very meaningful progress in that time. One of our objectives is making sure that as we leave, we do it in a smooth and orderly manner, which might involve a form of transition period once the negotiations are complete. But the other thing I think to keep in mind is that this is a very unusual negotiation, that we start from a position of having all the same laws, having all the same regulations, having regulators that have been working together for many, many years now, rather than what would be a normal trade negotiation where you're trying to remove barriers between countries. So no, we started optimistically, and we will be going into it confident that we will be successful in that. But then we will want to see a smooth and orderly transition as we come out at the end of the process.
It's interesting to see the pivotal place that the United Kingdom is going to be placing itself in with the next 2 years. And with that, the first thing that struck me when we were going to discuss this today was that the Minister of Scotland yesterday indicated that they are discussing having a referendum potentially in 2018 or 19 regarding their role with the EU and the United Kingdom. Could you comment on that potentially? Of what does that mean to the United Kingdom?
The Prime Minister has been very clear that we think the focus for now, we had a Scottish referendum in 2014 that was meant to be a once in a generation referendum with a very clear result that Scotland wanted to remain part of the United Kingdom. This Prime Minister, Theresa May, has made very clear her own very strong personal support for maintaining and strengthening that union, feels that the priority now should be getting the best possible agreement as we leave the European Union on behalf of the United Kingdom as a whole, looking where it makes sense to repatriate powers from Brussels, sometimes to London centrally and sometimes to the devolved administrations, be they in Edinburgh, Belfast, Cardiff or London as appropriate.
And as a strong leader, she has clearly indicated she's going to address those issues. She is... She's
clear that any idea of a second Scottish referendum now would be an unnecessary distraction.
Yes, she has. As far as being a resident right now in the United Kingdom, and you're an EU citizen, and the reverse, you are a United Kingdom citizen, but you are a resident of the EU. Do you anticipate this being a structural issue that will cause, let's say, delays? Because there's so many in both sides, especially related to the national health care card that you have in EU. If you are a United Kingdom citizen, you may seek medical care anywhere in the EU and vice versa. To allow the continuation of the free trade, this is going to be an important point, especially with the enormity of the size of your financial centers in London. The free flow of people is going to be very important to maintain the supremacy of your financial systems.
So again, I'll perhaps break that down into a number of different areas. So as we said at the start, getting control over immigration is one of the principal objectives for the British government from these negotiations, but we also want to make sure that the UK remains an incredibly attractive place for global talent to come and thrive and benefit being part of the UK. When you look at the specifics of what it might mean for individuals now, well, for the next 2 years while we remain part of the EU, nothing changes, so all the arrangements that are there will continue for that period. The exact arrangements after we leave will be a process and subject to the negotiation, and at this stage it would be wrong to try and prejudge exactly what that might be. The UK government has seen it as a very high priority to give clarity and certainty both to our own UK nationals living in the rest of the EU and to EU nationals living in the UK. We would like to give that certainty as quickly as possible, but clearly that's going to be part of the negotiation with our European counterparts.
Clearly, you're going to have a number of laws in the United Kingdom that are going to be revised relative to no longer being subject to some of the EU laws. I was reading that as much as 55% of the time of Parliament right now was spending on revising laws or creating laws to override the impact of the EU, and that the Parliament will become much more focused on the United Kingdom now and more functional because they won't be so distracted. Can you picture anything that is a law in the United Kingdom that is now overriding EU law that will be substantive in the nature to be able to strengthen the United Kingdom relative to the barriers you're experiencing right now with EU? Is there any one in particular?
So I would answer that question in a slightly different way, because obviously at this present moment we are subject to EU law and will remain subject while we remain a member. We've set a very clear objective, which is no longer being under the jurisdiction of the ECJ, the European Court of Justice. But on the other hand, what we do want to provide is as much certainty and continuity for people as possible. So there will be a single parliamentary act as we leave the European Union. It's being called the Great Repeal Bill. And what that will do is translate all the existing legislation that might have derived from the EU, of which a very substantial part over the last 40 years has come through EU jurisdiction and EU regulation and legislation that we've enacted in the UK. So the Great Repeal Bill will simply make sure all that existing legislation continues, but subject to UK courts and to UK Parliament. And then if we want to change anything after that, we can do it domestically through UK Parliament rather than needing to change that at the EU level.
So you're going to wipe the slate clean to make it easier. Start really fresh with all of those.
I would phrase it a slightly different way. We want to provide the maximum continuity. So on day one that we leave, all existing legislation will roll over.
Okay.
So any companies operating there now, looking, I don't know, whether it might be things like workers' rights or health and safety legislation or legislation in any industry, that will continue. So the day after we leave, that legislation will still continue. The Great Repeal Bill makes it under UK courts and UK parliamentary sovereignty rather than under ECJ.
Now, the Great Repeal Bill, will that be invoked after you have finished negotiating the withdrawal deal, or just once you invoke Article 50?
No, that will happen once we leave the European Union.
Okay.
So as I said, nothing will change for the negotiating period.
Okay.
But immediately on departure, that's when we'll trigger the Great Repeal Bill.
Okay. So you're trying to eliminate the high level of uncertainty among business and finance and immigration and everything associated with that as possible.
We recognise that uncertainty comes. You know, there's a lot of negotiation to do. There's a lot of business that will need to be talked through and worked out. What we want to do, though, is try and minimise that uncertainty, provide as clear a path as possible for our exit, make sure that we leave in an orderly manner and provide the greatest possible clarity all the way through. That doesn't mean we're going to be providing a sort of blow-by-blow account of the negotiations as they happen, but it does mean where there's something to say and we can provide certainty, we will do so. So the repeal bill is one example. There's another example where we've guaranteed funding that's currently coming through European sources around science innovation or agriculture. We've guaranteed that funding will continue. The exact mechanics of that will be negotiated out, whether that still comes through a European mechanism or is funded directly from the UK. That's what's going to be part of the negotiation.
So what does the United Kingdom plan to do about its defense? Do you think it's going to expand its own military? Let's talk about that, the general picture.
Sure. So for us, NATO is the cornerstone of defence, and while there is security and defence cooperation within the European Union, and particularly cooperation on fighting crime and tackling terrorism that we very strongly want to see continue and be part of, we've always been clear that nothing the EU level does should contradict or duplicate what happens at the NATO level. We're very proud that we're one of the countries that hits the 2% target for defence spending. We'd like to see more of our NATO partners reaching that level. We will continue to be a very, very strong and passionate supporter of NATO and encourage our counterparts across the European nations that are also members of NATO to do that. But the short answer is no, we don't expect a massive change because NATO is the cornerstone of our security and defence.
So that cornerstone is clearly going to remain strong as it relates to the United Kingdom.
Absolutely, and you know, it was a very high priority when Prime Minister May was here in January and met with your new president.
Yes.
Getting that reaffirmation of the commitment to NATO and the importance of NATO, we were delighted to see, and we'll continue to build and grow on that.
Do you see any similarities in the vote that occurred in June of 2016 with the United Kingdom relative to the United States and its move toward populism?
So I'll be honest, I'm always a bit wary about drawing too many parallels in these sorts of circumstances. You're talking about unique circumstances in the UK that led to our referendum, circumstances here in domestic politics that led to a vote here, and it would be absolutely wrong for me to be commenting on US domestic politics. I'm sure you'll appreciate that. But when we look at what the Prime Minister said when she got made Prime Minister in July 2016, so after our former Prime Minister resigned on the back of the vote,
yes,
she was very clear that one of her priorities is making a Britain that works for all, and recognising that there are some who feel they've been left behind by some of the changes that we've seen over the past years, whether as a result of new technology changes, whether as a result of globalisation. So it's a very big priority for the government, alongside all the Brexit work, to think about how do we create that fairer, more equal society. And I'm sure some of those changes are happening at a global level, and you're seeing them here in the US as well.
Do you ever anticipate rephrasing your immigration policies to directly reflect your internal economic needs and demands?
Clearly, as we come out of the European Union and end the free movement of people that the EU provides, we'll need to look at our immigration policies and practices to determine how that's going to work in the future. At this stage, it's still speculation, and we haven't made any announcements about what that new arrangement will look like. We recognise there are challenges that come with immigration and issues over, say, pressure on public services such as schools or housing, and how you tackle and address those issues. But for the UK, remaining a very open country that welcomes talent globally, that encourages people from a very rich and diverse range of backgrounds to come to the UK and make a success of life in the UK, that's going to be a very important priority for us going forward.
Could you explain for us the terminology difference between a hard Brexit and a soft Brexit? It's used frequently in the press, and I don't think it's well understood what the two differences are.
So I've heard lots of different terms in my time since the Brexit vote happened, whether that's hard Brexit, soft Brexit, the Icelandic model, the
Yes.
Canadian model, the Swiss model,
The Norway model.
the Norway model. The short answer is that actually these are not particularly helpful terms, I don't think, because the UK arrangements will be a uniquely British arrangement. So what we can say is that, as we've set out in the 12 objectives and the Prime Minister's speech from the 17th of January, which I'd highly recommend for people to have a read if they've not seen that
Yes.
before, we will be leaving the European Union. That means leaving the European single market, but we will be seeking to pursue a very bold and ambitious free trade agreement with the European Union once we've left, and getting the freest and most tariff-free exchanges of goods and services is absolutely top of our agenda of what we'd like to see in that future relationship.
Now, I'm curious, what role do you play here in the United States in this process?
So I'm the British Consul General here in San Francisco, so I have both a geographic responsibility on behalf of the government and then a set of key themes that I follow. So the geographic responsibility is for Northern California, Oregon, Washington, Alaska, Idaho, Montana and Wyoming, and part of my job is to get round to all of those places and understand what the unique issues, opportunities and challenges are in the different states. But then we look at the sort of key themes that we focus on, and for us the biggest one here is around trade and investment, so supporting UK companies that want to expand and export out to those markets in the geographic areas I just mentioned, but also encouraging and supporting US investment into the UK. Second area we look at and work very hard on is science and innovation collaboration. So we've got a fantastic team here looking at research, academic collaboration. Some of the places people will have heard of, obviously places like Stanford and Berkeley here,
yes.
But there's some fabulous schools up and down the patch. I've been to University of Wyoming, University of Alaska, University of Washington, and many others around that area. We do academic collaboration. We provide Marshall scholarships, and we've had 4 Marshall scholars from that region each year go to the UK. We also support British nationals if they get in trouble here, so we provide consular services, so people who've lost a passport or been hospitalised or jailed for something, we can support and help those individuals. And then of course we've got a very important role to project and inform people about the UK, whether that's doing interviews and having a public profile, being involved in social media, so I have a very active Twitter account and people following me there.
We've been noticing your Twitter account.
So I try quite hard to use that to give people a bit of a flavour of the sorts of things that we get up to. So we've recently been in Alaska. We were there for the start of the Iditarod and letting people have a sense of that, as well as obviously meeting with Governor Walker up there. We have a wide range of visitors, official visitors and ministers coming over. So we support those visits, and all the time we're trying to promote the UK, understand how we can support trade and investment, how we can help to develop and strengthen those very special relationships that exist between the UK and US.
So is there any time for you to enjoy rugby?
A little bit. My playing days are long over, but for those of your listeners who have heard of the British Lions, they will be touring New Zealand later this year, and that will be a very high priority for me to track their progress. Okay.
So is there anything that you'd like to say in closing?
So I think 2 points I would make, if I may, just to reiterate what we've talked about earlier. One is, the government has set out its 12 objectives for these negotiations, and I'd highly recommend people to look at either the Prime Minister's speech from the 17th of January, or there's what we call in the UK a white paper that gives a bit more detail behind each of these 12 objectives. Clearly there's going to be a process of negotiation that we go through, but we set out what we would like to see from that negotiation. That includes, as I said, a bold and ambitious free trade agreement with the European Union once we've left. And then the second area is we're very confident that we're doing this, A, from a position of strength, and the things that make the UK a great place to invest and a great place to work with will remain. So things like the strength of the rule of law, the English language, the global positioning, the fabulous sort of research and scientific collaboration that we have, and remaining a very attractive place for global talent. Those are really the priorities that we have on the British government side.
The British strength will remain the British strength.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Your insights are so valuable. We so appreciate your time. And I can't imagine your hectic schedule with all your responsibilities. And we sincerely appreciate the time you took with us so that we can learn today of what to look forward for in the future.
Well, thank you, Mary. And obviously, not just here in San Francisco, but across our network of posts in the US, we're here to help support businesses who are looking to invest, helping to support business who wants to do trade with the UK. So please, encourage your customers to make use of those services.
The upcoming negotiations for the United Kingdom will not occur without challenges and the need for extraordinary diplomacy. Key issues for Theresa May will be free trade deals, agreeing to manufacturing standards for products sold within the EU, including the related labor standards. Additionally, redesigning the healthcare insurance card that currently allows all EU members to receive free medical care wherever they reside within the EU, and potentially the most challenging, the modifications to the free movement of all EU citizens within its borders. But there is a much bigger issue here than just the United Kingdom exiting the European Union. Many other nations have been experiencing growing populism movements within their own borders. Germany, United Kingdom, France, and Italy overwhelmingly make up the vast majority of the gross domestic product of the European Union. If 3 of the 4 largest economic units were to leave, the financial stability of the remaining members would be threatened. Trying to patch together a workable arrangement with the smaller members would be very difficult. Other countries such as Austria, Finland, and the Netherlands are openly discussing such referendums themselves. Many others are addressing it more quietly, with a wait-and-see attitude, witnessing how well the United Kingdom does with their own negotiations. So all eyes will be on the United Kingdom as they negotiate their path to a new world where they are still members of the European community, but not members of the European Union. The future fate of the EU as a whole could be decided by the outcome of their exit strategies. On Point will be turning its attention next to the increasing populism movement within the United States. With the unexpected success and influence of presidential candidates Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump in November of 2016, the stage has been set here as well for significant change. So join us again when we explore the growing discontent within the state of California, where 2 separation movements are afoot, Calexit and the state of Jefferson.